Welcome to the 245th of the COVID Calls. This is a daily discussion of the COVID-19 pandemic with a diverse collection of disaster experts. My name is Scott Gabriel Knowles. I'm a historian of disasters at the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. I'm coming to you live from Daejeon, South Korea. Today is a discussion with writer Liz Lenz, author of, excuse me. Let me start that again. Today is a discussion with writer Liz Lenz, author of the new book, Belabored, A Vindication of the Rights of Pregnant Women. Just a reminder, you can catch COVID Calls live at its new time, weekdays at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time on YouTube. Just go to the COVID Calls YouTube channel to watch. You can hear COVID Calls anytime, recorded as podcasts on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, or anywhere you get podcasts. You can also keep up with COVID Calls via Twitter using the handle @US of Disaster or @COVID Calls. Please help spread the word and send suggestions for future guests and future topics. Please feel free to suggest yourself as a future guest. As of today, March 24th, 2021, there are 2,736,452 deaths from COVID-19 globally. That's according to the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Center. The death toll in the United States from COVID-19 has climbed to 543,849. In the state of Iowa, there have been 5,683 deaths from COVID-19. As a way to bring some humanity to the numbers, I've been reading a life story or a story of advocacy for those impacted by the pandemic in some way, and I'd like to continue that now. The headline is, a year after its first COVID patient, Jackson Health honors staff, remembers lives lost. This is by Michelle Marchanti and appeared March 19th, 2021 in the Miami Herald. March 19th marked a year since Jackson Health System saw its first COVID-19 patient admitted into one of its hospitals. A year since Jackson's staff, like the rest of the community, began quote, walking through the valley of the shadow of death, unquote, said Reverend Jacqueline D. Kelly shortly after calling for a moment of silence to remember the personal heroes that were lost in the pandemic. Kelly, director of Jackson's spiritual care services, spoke at a ceremony to commemorate the day Jackson Health entered the fight against COVID-19, surrounded by a memorial of blue and white flags planted in Alamo Park at Jackson's Miami, Florida campus. The blue flags symbolize Jackson's 5,360 COVID-19 survivors. The white flags symbolize the 977 lives lost at Miami-Dade County's public hospital since last March. 3 of those who died were Jackson employees. At the time, we knew so little about the virus, how it spread, or who was most at risk. We also had no idea how long it would last or the impact it would have on our reality, said Jackson Health President and CEO Carlos Migoya. COVID struck Florida hard, and Miami-Dade early on became the state's epicenter for the disease. The county has confirmed more than 432,000 cases and more than 5,700 deaths, making Miami-Dade the 4th highest county in the country in COVID cases after Los Angeles, Maricopa, and Cook counties, according to Johns Hopkins University. In my eyes, you're not just heroes, you're superheroes, Migoya said. As we reflect in the last year, the trauma we've endured and the hardships we have faced, never forget that the work you have done throughout this pandemic has made a lasting impression. I always say that Jackson is not the buildings, but rather the miracle workers inside of these buildings, he said. The pandemic is not over yet, but the tide has changed. Doctors now know more about the disease and how to treat patients. Cases are declining, and there are 3 COVID-19 vaccines available in the United States, all which have shown to be effective in helping to prevent severe disease and health. More than 2.5 million Floridians have been fully vaccinated, and the Jackson Health Center has helped vaccinate more than 123,000 people in the past 3 months. Mr. Migoya said, "We have not let this silent enemy defeat us." Okay, I'd like to turn to my discussion for today. Really excited to bring Liz Lenz to COVID Calls. Let me introduce Liz. Liz Lenz's writing has appeared in the Huffington Post, the Washington Post, the Columbia Journalism Review, the New York Times, Pacific Standard, and others. Her book, Godland, was published in 2019 with Indiana University Press, and her second book, Belabored was published last year, 2020, by Bold Type Books. Liz's essay, All the Angry Women, was also included in the anthology Not That Bad, edited by Roxane Gay. Liz received her MFA in creative writing from Lesley University, and she lives in Iowa. Liz Lenz, thanks for joining me on COVID Calls today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'd like to start the way I usually do, just to find out where you're calling in from and what the pandemic situation is there, what the vaccination situation is there.
Well, I am calling in from Iowa, Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where the pandemic situation has just not been a situation. Basically, after this time last year, we had a shutdown of sorts, which I think for the majority of America was pretty on par. And then sometime around April, our governor announced she was reopening the state, and that was after partnering with a company with no healthcare experience for testing for COVID, and then just boom, we were back open. There were some restrictions, but I think I've been every once in a while been out, and it just there's two. It really doesn't feel like we're all in this together, right? People are being forced out into the world, others are going out willingly, and then there's others who've been hiding in their house for over a year now. And so we had a reinforcement of restrictions right after a huge surge right around the election because of all the Republican campaign events, and now and probably all the vacations too. We don't know because our contact tracing doesn't exist. And so we had just for a few weeks, some more restrictions, and now it's just a free-for-all. The vaccinations are going slowly. We used to be one of the worst states in the nation for vaccination rates. Now we're not so bad, but with rural counties and rural populations, and of course, like many other places and many other states, the populations that are hit most and hardest for us are immigrant populations or people of color, and those we have a hard time with. Language barriers, cultural barriers, and so those slowly are being handled, but again, it's kind of like it's a real Mad Max kind of world out there for the vaccine situation. I participated in the Novavax trial, or I'm still participating in it. Yeah. So I had kind of seen that request go out, and I was like, well, I'm relatively young. I mean, 38. I mean, that's on the edge of being young-ish. Younger-ish. Yeah. And then so I was like, and healthy, so why not, do something? And so hopefully that vaccine has had some really good results, especially with the variants, and it's kind of a fun little vaccine because it's made out of I'm gonna sound like a real idiot to you, a smart person, but because it's made out of the little bug cell with the little spikes on it. So I find that to be very fascinating.
How does that work if you're in a trial like that? I mean, because there's also placebo. So when will you know if you actually received it?
So they're gonna so there's a couple of things. So when I started the trial back in January, I think is when I started it, was they were kind of like, well, we don't know what the situation with this is going to be, but if you qualify for another vaccine, we'll unblind you. And then when Iowa announced that everybody who wants a vaccine should be able to get one, on April 5th, they announced that they were gonna double unblind us, or so we'll all go back in. Right. And then we'll all get a shot, and then whoever had the vaccine will get a placebo, and then whoever had a placebo will get a vaccine. So however it happens, so it doesn't mess up their data. I'm in a Facebook group with some of the people who've chosen to unblind themselves by getting antibody tests, for whatever that's worth. But but yeah, so it's been fascinating. And then I've never participated in a study before. I grew up a little bit skeptical of experimenting on my body and the government. Like
That's a healthy skepticism, and vaccine hesitancy as a discussion in America is a lot more complicated than yes and no.
Yes, and I recently wrote a book about pregnant bodies and the history of medicine and misogyny in America. And I have to say, the history, as a person who believes in science and who believes in learning, I get the complications and the frustrations and the intersection of race and gender and class that happens with medicine, especially in America, because we like to pretend that medicine and science is this just, like abstruse thing that sits off to the side, a little god on our shoulders that can never do any wrong. But it's really messed us all up and continues to mess us up. America has one of the worst maternal death rates out of developed nations. So there's in source for Black women, and so there's a lot of that at play there. But it is encouraging to see people getting the vaccine, and it feels like the majority are gonna do it.
I had a chance to talk with physician Javi Karkowski last week, and she's also got a new book out, and she basically is a physician who specializes in high-risk pregnancy, and she talked about dealing with that through the year, and this issue around pregnant women as a subcategory for vaccination is so layered and so fraught because in general they've been excluded. And then when it comes time to give them advice, the advice around these vaccines has been they've had to rely basically on very local advice and on their individual physicians, which is great if you have an open channel with a physician that you can call. But if you don't, as you said earlier, lots of women don't. What do you do? And I'd like to sort of bring that back to your book, Belabored. And I want to talk about that book. And I want to particularly sort of ask you how you see that work, because you finished the book before the pandemic, which is sort of amazing. And then the whole world changes, and now you have to sort of talk about it a lot, but also maybe think about the pandemic through the book. I wonder if we could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, the timing was so crazy. I finished last round of edits on the book, really just right before the Iowa caucuses. And at the time, I was working as a columnist and covering the caucuses, so things were kind of crazy. And then the Iowa caucuses happened, and then the world shut down, and then I got advanced reader copies of my book the day everything shut down. It was like one of the last packages I got for a while. And I was like, well, surely I'll be able to do a book tour in the fall. Sad trombone. But it's been interesting because of the way that the pandemic has particularly impacted mothers and people who care for children. I want to be careful to use inclusive language, but and so my book, talks about the way that American society has refused to help mothers because the bodies lie at the intersection of misogyny and power and religion and medicine. And it's just this big toxic soup of power and control. And we can't seem to get a grasp on it. And, like you said, with the vaccine, there's just not a lot of good answers for things because we haven't done research on it because nobody wants to experiment on mothers and babies for good reason, because we used to experiment on mothers and babies and it was enslaved women and we did it without pain medicine or their permission, so like not great. Let's not do that. But there should be another way. I feel like in between nothing and the complete brutalization of body, we could find a middle ground. But In any case, so all that, like, and as the world has shut down, and then I'm a single mother, and then working full time, and then trying to do Zoom school, is like everything that, I'd been talking about with failures of policy just felt so compounded and so personalized. And it's a situation where, people who care for children, especially primary caretakers, you're so busy, and you just have to care for that person, that you don't have time to look out at the systemic oppression. But I think something that the pandemic really did was just strip away all pretense, strip away all those like messages of just try harder, love your kid better.
Right.
And then you realize, you're like, no, this is a systemic problem that, and I think it's interesting, because I think it gave us as a society a real opportunity to say no. Like, we need schools, actually stop defunding them. We need universal pre-K. We need paid parental leave. We need to pay parents equally. And I think we have this moment, but I'm worried that moment's slipping away from us. You know, it's also, it seems to be just a complete failure of imagination that we have this complete collapse. Women are screaming, and we're like, nah, it's gonna be fine. Let's just bail out an airline, and you just suck it back up, lady. So,
You wrote a piece in the Washington Post in December, which laid out, I mean, it was sort of like, here's what we can do to avoid the complete destruction of life for working moms, working caregivers in the United States. And that was just before the Biden administration was inaugurated. I'd like to go through some of that with you, because, what you've just been talking about is all totally resonant at a general level. But then you've also laid out some quite specific things that you think really need to happen. So I wonder if you could talk about those. I mean, paid family leave would be a good place to start, but there's a lot more.
Oh, yeah. And the crazy thing about it, and it's so funny because I wrote this in my book too, where I tried to not be so like, everything's bad. I tried to write solutions, but going through and researching for my book, I realized the solutions existed. And those solutions have existed for centuries. We just won't do it. And I wrote something in my book that I keep coming back to. And it's like, well, Arlie Russell Hochschild wrote it, and she got like a Guggenheim. And if y'all won't listen to her, then who's going to listen to me? But I think I might be a little bit more annoying than her, so that might be helpful. She's smarter, I'm more annoying. But yeah, so back to the Washington Post article, it was just saying like, look, these policy solutions exist. It's a better minimum wage, because you want to talk about who cares for kids. It's minimum wage workers who care for kids, frontline workers. So, we need to make sure that the saving of one type of woman doesn't happen at the expense of the other woman, so we need to be intersectional here. It's creating better labor laws, allowing caregivers to unionize, allowing like in Iowa, we've stripped a lot of collective bargaining rights from teachers who are teachers, mostly women, mostly mothers, mostly caregivers. So, building back up those labor rights, a fair minimum wage, you paid parental leave, and equal pay. Like, sign that ERA right now. Just do it. It's a paperwork issue at this point. Those things matter. And I also think it's interesting, because we also are coming out of a time where we lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whose work was really about, it was a subversive in a way, because she fought for equal rights by saying, well, like, if you oppress a woman, you're also oppressing a man. And I've been thinking about this too, because in this conversation about mothers and caregivers, we're erasing fathers who are sometimes, not often, nobody get mad at me, shut in their offices doing all this work because their bosses aren't letting them. Oh, right. And that's another policy solution we need to give. Like, don't give PPP loans to companies that don't have like great workplace policies for both sets of parents. Like,
Mhm.
a workplace might be more forgiving of a mother, but might be more, like, why is the dad doing the childcare? Because of cultural biases that still persist. So, I do believe a lot of fathers in America want to be present for their kids, but just can't find a way to do it, especially with the demands of their jobs and their work. And if you don't have a corporate culture that provides for that, then and how do you make that corporate culture? It's easy. The government is great at making corporations do things, so like just give them a few more hoops to jump through. It's fine. Like, they're companies, they're gonna be fine.
But these structural things, so specific policy ideas,
Yes.
which part of structural change. And as you
Mhm.
said, if we can't see that over the past year in the United States, there will be no other lesson that can show it to people. It's been obvious at every which way
Yeah.
the cracks in the structures that support oppression for working people, for working mothers, and for women. Generally, one other piece of that, some interesting data points throughout the year, which I wonder you've probably seen, which that people also reported, they liked certain aspects of being with their family more. Not every
Mm.
aspect, right?
Yes,
So, which is an interesting thing to build on, I
but
think. You sort of bring those two together. I wonder what we get.
yeah, the flexibility, the ability to, know your kids better, the time at home,
Yeah,
the ability to say, no, I'm not going to go into the office today, but I'll go in tomorrow, or, having more flexible hours where, like, well, does it matter if I answer email between, 9 p.m. and 10 p.m.? And
right.
take an hour during the day so I can take my kid to their doctor appointment or something. So, just having more flexibility. And it did seem like in the beginning of pandemic, companies and employers, I should just say employers, were very flexible. And now, especially among my working mom parent friends, it feels like it's getting a little tight. It's getting like, well, people are getting vaccinated, why are you still wanting these things? And it's like, no, because it was great. And I think I also think something that gets to the culture and is kind of an adjacent issue, but it is what you're kind of talking about, is that we have a culture of productivity and work, 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 but that's completely unsustainable, and
Right.
people are hitting a wall. I have so many friends who are journalists who've just quit or who have been fired because the media industry is just, it's always a mess, but especially now,
Right.
who've been
Right.
fired and are like, okay, well, I'm just going to go sleep for a month. The rigors of writing and reporting on COVID have been really, really, really hard. I mean, I experienced that. When pandemic hit, I was, working full time at a newspaper, and then we lost sports pages. So I was smart. I was like, oh, why don't we start a kids page for, kids who are home from school? And they were like, great, do it. So that was another full-time job,
On top of,
on
right.
top of that, and then taking care of my kids, and then Zoom school, and then and then my state, my city especially, we had an inland hurricane, commonly called a derecho, so which destroyed our town. And then I was reporting on that. In addition, I was doing some stringing and writing for the Washington Post, all in addition. And then when I was laid off in October, it was just like, I'm burnt out, right?
Mhm.
So we have this culture that demands really high levels of productivity that aren't sustainable, especially if you are a human being. Like, and if you have like
Right.
children, like, and that's the thing too, you think about a lot, like, well, who can sustain that? As a parent, well, it's because you have a partner at home who's taking the hit in their career. So maybe let's not let's not use that as the bar for success.
Well, we've had such
Yeah.
a culture of kind of grit and lean in and find your resilience, which has placed so much, just this culture you're talking about, the unsustainability of it, would put so much of the onus back on the individual to say,
Mm-hmm.
here's 5 de-stressing tips for you in the middle of a pandemic, or, here's a healthier diet that you can adopt, which will allow you to work more hours in the day. And it's it's a sort of toxic help culture as well. And I just don't know how to, I mean, you're offering some suggestions about how we surface it, but I just really worry that this moment, again, as you said, will pass and there will be a normalization.
Well, I think, culture changes when policy changes. We see that with suffrage, right? It was a huge debate, passes, and now, we still debate women's ability to do things, but not vote, and so I do believe on a structural level that if you did incentivize corporations and I know at least like early drafts of the Build Back Better plan had some of these. I know stipulations in them. I'd like to see how it's changed since then. But if you incentivize corporations to change, to have better policies, if you let people unionize and organize, that would happen. Culture would change, and culture has changed at times of crisis in America. I'm reading right now. I'm researching a lot about how America used to have like really great childcare back during World War II, like kind of this universal childcare situation, when all the women were working because all the men were fighting, and that dried up when men came back and policy changed. But I think sometimes we live in this historical bubble where we forget that things haven't always been this way, and that you can push and organize for change, and it is a long haul. So I do have hope there, but you're right. Like, we live in a culture that whose response to systemic issues is to blame the individual, and that's why I live in a state where people are like, I'm not going to wear a mask because they think it's an individual choice.
Right.
When, Senator Warnock preached a few Sundays ago, that we're all as close to each other as a cough, right? That we are actually not individuals. We are a system, and we don't work if we are all relying on everybody just to lean in and get through it. Like, that's just not. And I also think I'm sorry, I'm babbling a lot, but another interesting part of this is I think people are realizing, at least the American worker is realizing, I don't want to be miserable. I've had so many people I've talked to who are just like, you know what? I was miserable before, but I thought that was like a fine level. And then the pandemic hit, and then I had real misery, and I'm going to retire early. I read some statistic that 25% of American teachers are planning on dropping out at the end of this school year because they're miserable, because we treated them like crap. Of course they're going to quit. Like, again, I know a lot of people in media who are like, this sucks, like, I'm out, and I think people are realizing, like, maybe misery isn't the point of life. And I think that that's kind of been an American myth, especially one we've sold to women, that, pain is the point and you have to martyr yourself on the cross of motherhood. And I think there's a whole generation of women who are like, hell no. Like, the point of my life is not to bleed on the cross of the American patriarchy. It's to be a full and complete human. So I don't think this conversation is over, even if the policy solutions don't get passed. I know that it'll keep going, because there's a lot of women who have big chips on their shoulder right now. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
I just want to remind folks that you're listening to COVID Calls, and I'm talking to Liz Lenz today. We've been talking about her book, Belabored, and around the politics around the impossibility of doing so much work in the middle of a pandemic, and possibility for structural change. Let's talk a little bit about sort of politics at the more local level. And I want to, again, surface one of the pieces you wrote throughout this year, and I consume as much as I can about the pandemic without just sort of walking off into the desert. But you wrote one of these pieces where it's one of these ones where I read it and I was like, oh God, like, it just really stopped me. And it was your op-ed in February about the governor of Iowa. And it's a piece called "Welcome to Iowa, a state that just doesn't care if you live or die." It was in the Post. I just want to read one sentence from this because it really stopped me short. So sort of this phase of like, will we reopen and how at a state by state level? And you wrote, initially, Iowa's biggest outbreaks were at food processing plants, which employ a large amount of immigrant labor. At first, the plants shut down, farmers with no market for their hogs euthanized them. Then a moral calculus was made, pork before people, and plants opened up. You're like channeling Upton Sinclair here in a pandemic mode. I mean, it's amazing to me the way you laid out that whole syllogism around decision making at the level of Iowa. And then, as you said earlier, it's like now you're in the Thunderdome. It's like masks off and everything is fine. Let me start with this question: what does the governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, think she's doing with these policies? Is this her path to the White House in her mind? Or like, I just help me understand what governors like Kim Reynolds think they're accomplishing here.
It's the economy, right? It's money. And I know that a lot of the successes that are being touted at these press conferences that she still has is that like, oh, Iowa has low unemployment. Well, how many people stopped looking for jobs? How many people died, by the way? Like, I know that's real grim, but I think we need to ask that question, especially since we have like a huge aging population. How many people moved because they're sick of being treated like garbage at a policy level? And those are the successes that are being touted, right? Like we kept going, we never stopped. We, in the face of a pandemic, we looked it in the face and we licked it in the face. It's like, I don't think that's a success. We are sitting on a huge, Iowa has a huge budget surplus, and it's, and the governor won't release it. I mean, we have Iowans who are starving, and we're just going to sit on it. I mean, another non-pandemic issue, we don't even have clean water. Like, the city of Des Moines is right there on a river. They can't clean their river up enough to use that water, so they have to go underground for the water. Like, our water in this state is at a crisis level. We won't do anything about it because we just want to say we have money. And I think that that's another thing. We should go back to Hochschild, who wrote this wonderful book, Strangers in Their Own Land, which came out a couple years ago, to talk about, like, the appearance of success, and especially, in states where, like, government policies are, like, giving you cancer through, bad drinking water or poisoned groundwater. Right. But if you have a job and you feel successful in that moment, then that assuages some of the bigger systemic issues. And I don't know, there, but then there's also issues of voter suppression, and and who gets to vote and how. So it's hard to. I always have a hard time when people go, oh, well, it's just like the red state, and that's where all the jerks live. And you're like, okay, but like, I don't know. We also just passed, some laws about who can vote and how that are pretty restrictive, and it's and so, who gets a say and who doesn't, and it's certainly not the workers in the Tyson meat packing plants, and then it's also, pork is big money. And I'm not just crapping on Republicans here. I think it goes both ways. And I hate doing that. I hate being like both sides, because, doing like a dichotomy is just, it flattens all nuance. But, but as far as politics goes, pork's big money, ag's big money, and they throw it around. And so, who you gonna appease? And it is money. And if you don't see the human suffering because you choose not to, because you don't speak Spanish, or you choose to just forget that, it's immigrant labor in those meatpacking plants, or like the governor of South Dakota, then blame the immigrants for living in such close quarters. Ma'am, right. Stop. Like, on 5 levels, please stop right. with that. But and I'll say Iowa's governor stopped short of saying that, but pretty much indicated right. that. And so I believe that in a couple of years, once open records requests finally get filled, and once lawsuits make their ways to the courts, that we're going to realize the rot we were living on, and I don't like it. And I hope nobody else does, but I think it's really easy to forget it if you yourself are doing okay.
When you're active in a church community, and you've written about the role of faith and church in America and Middle America, particularly in these last few years, the Trump years. And I raise that because most of my family is in Texas. That's where I grew up. And you don't make sense of big events in Texas without making sense of it through discussions that happen in church, around church, and about church. And even shutting down last spring, the conversations I had with my parents were about, well, what's this going to mean for the choir? What's this going to mean for the church choir? That's how the conversation unfolded. I wonder how you've seen that there in Iowa.
I grew up in Texas, Allen, Texas. But I haven't lived there since I was 13, so I guess it doesn't
You
count.
can go back anytime. If you've done, yeah.
My
They
parents
told me I could come back anytime I want. They tell me that all the time.
I'm healthy enough to go back to Texas. My parents still live there and were affected by the storm, and it's been a nightmare. But
I'm sorry about that. Mine too.
yeah, oh gosh. And I will say I think religion plays a role everywhere, but something I have been thinking a lot about is the role that religious institutions played in the spread of COVID, especially the ones that pushed so hard to stay open. Right after the violent insurrection at the Capitol, I donned a mask and went to a couple churches, the ones that said they were safely opened, and they were not safely opened. I mean, that's just like, it's such nonsense because it's a bunch of people standing around, and maybe they wear masks inside while they walk in, but then the moment the music starts, masks off, everybody singing in a closed windowless auditorium. I mean, the churches in Texas are the same as churches in Iowa. They're massive cement/brick buildings with these kind of like, windowless auditoriums in the middle, and you're just like, this is, and we're not, and you can't, it's hard to talk about because, then you bump into the freedom of religion. I remember asking a city council person about this after going to some of these churches and peeking in and being like, oh God, and asking him like, what's the enforcement here? He was like, you want to go in and tell a church to put on a mask? He's like, your funeral. And it's true. I mean, California had lawsuits. Everybody's had lawsuits. Everybody has had these religious institutions push so hard for reopening. During the middle of the summer, there was a big outdoor revival in Kansas City, so they could pray for the nation's healing. And then the numbers in Kansas City shot through the roof. But like, but there's no, but it's so hard in America to say, you church, you're killing America. And there's also the added layer of vaccine disinformation. QAnon, by the way, getting spread through churches. Vaccine disinformation getting spread through churches. These are closed conservative communities that distrust, quote unquote, mass media, distrust what's being said through, I mean, literally any Democrat. You could be the most Republican Democrat, hi Biden, who is, by the way, one of our most religious presidents of all time. Yeah. And then he could say something, they're like, and this has been happening, and you and I both know, because if you grew up in Texas, I mean, you remember Waco, you remember this Ruby Ridge. This isn't new. Like this is how, I was homeschooled in Texas too, so that tells you the level of crazy. But it's always been these like closed communities operating as their own, like microcosm, but in a pandemic, it's not so closed. In a pandemic, that's how it gets spread. You talk about Dave Ramsey having the big parties. Religion, in this past year, churches in America have played a huge role in the mass extinction event. And I don't know how we're ever going to fully grapple with that, but there, yeah, but I say that, and of course, people are like, not my church, and not my church, like
Mhm.
the little liberal rainbow flag flying Iowa Lutheran church I go to has been so strict about, trying to keep people home. And I know that also it's complicated, right? Like, because churches are how people organize. Churches in Iowa are now doing vaccine outreach to
Right.
communities. So it's complicated, but there's also some real problems here with the way we capitulate to religion in America, and I don't know how to solve that one. That's a real tough one.
I mean, you've gotten right into the center of the problem here, though, which, so the nature of some of these communities, the more conservative ones, there might be misinformation spreading,
Mhm.
a general distrust of democratic policy. But at the same time, those might be the very ones that are helping to staff soup kitchens, dealing with job loss in a community. It's not an either or, it's a complicated sort of community within a broader community.
Well, and this is why if you completely rip away a social safety net and then rely on religious nonprofits to provide that safety net, you have big problems and people fall through the net. This is why a social safety net is necessary, because you don't want to leave it up to groups who actively discriminate against LGBTQ people. Like, it's banana pants, and stop it. Build up the social safety net, make it fair for everyone. And, it's great, I read stories about, like, well, this church offered health insurance to its members. Cool. Who are the members? White people? Great. Like, let you, we can't, it has to be a bigger conversation. And you're right, like, you know, part of the reason I'm still involved in a faith community is because it keeps me active in my community and helping other
Mhm.
people, keeps me outside of myself, volunteering with Meals on Wheels and those things that I feel very passionate about. But at the same side of it, you have to realize this is a systemic issue. And, no matter how many nice white ladies named Nancy volunteer in a soup kitchen, it's never going to solve the fact that the trans women are getting murdered, and not getting vaccinated and dying of COVID. These are problems, and we need to rebuild a social safety net, which goes back to policy solutions. Like, I mean, I don't love again, I was raised in Texas. I don't love the government. I know
Yeah.
it sounds like I do, but I don't. But, like, I mean, come on, let's get some policy solutions to, like, pull that hole back up, and then stop being so shocked when people fall through the cracks.
Wonder if you might talk a little bit just about faith at this time. I mean, beyond sort of how churches are put together and the politics that they become magnetic around. I mean, this year has been a year in which people have been looking at death and looking at suffering. And I feel
Yeah.
like, just like you, I feel like there's been so much news coverage in every angle of the pandemic. Maybe I'm reading the wrong newspapers, but I haven't seen as much around the complexities with religion and also the complexities of faith and sense, what we call it in disaster research, sense making. But for most Americans, that means like faith, and what does disaster mean to their faith?
I actually feel like communities of faith, white, I should say, especially say white communities of faith, have been isolated from this. There seems to be a lot of, well, death is death and God is God, but there hasn't been, we haven't collectively mourned as a nation. I know the Biden administration has, held a memorial service, but, I remember my college chapel having a service after 9/11. There's nothing like that. People haven't been able to gather. We haven't been able to get a sense of the loss. And because of the way the deaths have been politicized, people are quiet about it. People are ashamed of it. Um, people, and so I feel like there's a real hollowness, people just forcing themselves on without stopping and taking stock of everything that we have lost as a nation. And I don't know how you make that happen, again, in previous disasters, in previous times of mass loss. There has been a grappling. One of my friends who's just an incredible writer, Colin Dickey, wrote about the resonance between the rise of spiritualism post Civil War and what's happening, what could happen now. And I wonder a lot about that, that there were also, mass revivals, Protestant revivals post Civil War too, and then there was also the spiritualism, people trying to grapple with the loss of all their sons and brothers post Civil War. So there has to be something, and I would hope that faith leaders, and I know that sounds incredibly naive, and trust me, I'm not incredibly naive, but that there would be some sort of like reckoning with everything we've lost, the human life. But again, I have to wonder about that too, because if we think about who dies from COVID, it's marginalized folks. So you're gonna get Franklin Graham's church to have a mass service for all the immigrants who died at meat packing plants. We don't even know because states aren't even releasing that data. So that's also another problem. Is that like we can't even collectively grasp the loss. I think it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But it would be nice if we could somehow mourn as a nation.
One of the things I really like about your writing is that you're not naive about the way policy works. I mean, you get down into the details of policy, but at the same time, you maintain, I think, and you correct me on this, but you maintain some hope or optimism for the commons, and in different ways at different scales. And this, we've been talking about, religion and faith in America, even as you describe it. I agree with you. Franklin Graham's not the right person to lead some sort of a post-pandemic American tent revival, but local churches, local faith leaders, that will be a powerful place for that kind of revival to take place, won't it?
And if you think about who we are electing, we have an active reverend now as a senator in Georgia. Once again, Biden is. I thought Obama was one of our most religious presidents of all time. But Biden, takes that to a new level. And so I do think there is opportunity there, but I do think faith in America is so political, and always has been, by the way. I mean, thank you, Eisenhower and Billy Graham, who politicized Christianity in America and made it more about nationalism than faith. But that it will be interesting. It would be nice to see if we could puncture a hole and find a way to mourn, and I mean that in whatever spiritual sense that means for most folks. But but America is still large. No matter how many think pieces the Atlantic writes, America is still a nation of people who largely profess to be of a Christian faith. And so it would be interesting. But yes, you are right, I do have hope. I don't think I would write if I didn't have hope. I think that this is the fight of our lives, and it won't end here. It doesn't end when everybody gets vaccinated and has their hot girl summer. Like it continues, and the effects of this are going to be felt for a long, long time. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna be, kicking over the stones of the pandemic and seeing all the worms and rot beneath, and that's gonna give us a lot to grapple with. All the things that we were able to hide from when we were just in our homes, we won't be able to hide from anymore, and that will be hard. but I also hope that it brings change. And I don't mean that in like a silver lining way, because I'm not grateful for a mass extinction event, and I never
No.
will be. No, not ever. But and no buts. I just am not grateful for it. And whatever good we can come make out of this, I hope that's how you create meaning, right? So,
Hmm.
oh,
Just,
that was holy.
well, it's just honest. I mean, I just want to remind folks you're listening to COVID Calls. I'm talking to Liz Lenz today. So we've talked about motherhood, and we've talked about God and the pandemic.
All the light topics.
Yeah, well, that's what we do. I mean, COVID Calls for sure. Disaster every day for at least an hour. But I sort of want to ask you a bit about what you're thinking about next, because those two books came out in such rapid succession, and you talked about what it's like to have a book come out basically the day a pandemic starts in a country. So you've kind of been kept from doing the normal things an author will do, which is to go out either on the internet or in person, in the old days, in person, interact with people, get the ideas out, refine them, and then bring them back to your workshop at a quiet moment and start on the next project. And it seems like you haven't had that.
I've never had that. I'm a working single mother.
Yes, good correction. Thank you for that. That's right. Okay, so another myth to puncture, but let's say in the 1 to 5 minutes you have after your kids go to bed and before you collapse, that would be the time when you could take some stock over what you've written in the last couple of years. How's that working for you?
Like I said, I was laid off in October, and that was kind of a huge halt on everything, which in some ways was nice, caused some new problems in other ways. But the things I'm thinking about right now are especially how this is. I see the crisis that I'm really interested in is a relational crisis, which is also a systemic crisis in married relationships, especially as they've been kind of like laid bare, especially in this pandemic year. What does it say about our cultural institutions of marriage specifically that still breed inequality? And how do you change that? And how do look at a society of women who are screaming out for help? And how do you help them? And how do you see that intersectionally, through the relationships, which, so interesting because of the history of marriage, it used to be an economic thing, and now we say it's about love, but it's still economic, but we just don't talk about that. So how do we how do you get to that? So I'm always interested in where our humanity meets a system, which is why religion, which is why pregnant bodies. And so that's what I'm thinking about now. How is this going to impact relationships? Are we going to see a huge wave of pandemic divorces? I think we might. That's not exactly a bad thing, I don't think. Because I also think we need to reevaluate what we describe as success for a relationship. But those are the things I'm thinking about.
The big discourse out there right now about how millennials don't get divorced and then delay. I mean, the data points are all over the place.
Yes.
People waiting later to get married, but then also they don't get divorced. All of that
they could all get divorced in the next year. We don't know.
I know, right? Exactly. I'm like, I think you want to hold these pieces until we see a little bit of like what's it like in the summer.
Yes. And obviously, because I'm a writer, and the best thing about being a writer is talking to people. And I've been talking to women about this, and it is very fascinating. Yeah, really fascinating to see how it's changed people's attitudes to relationships. And, even just like progressive people, and what's happening there. I think it could change America. Sheila with Firestone, said there's no systemic change unless you feel it in the bedroom. So I think that's happening.
I wonder how you like when you start down the road of a topic like this, where are you looking to get information? I mean, I don't want you to give up the full like recipe for your success as a writer, but Are you starting with like small groups of people and work outward to understand that? Or you work with big data sets and come in? Like, how do you put together a topic like that?
Look at you talking to me like a scientist. I go by my feelings.
Okay. Well,
No,
most social scientists do too, if they're honest.
Thank God. I'm not. First, how I've always done it is I read as widely and as deeply as possible, which is what I'm doing now. I've been really reading deeply in. I mean, for Belabored, I read a lot of 19th century or 18th, 19th century feminists, and now I'm reading very deeply in the radical feminists of the 60s and 70s, and just trying to see, okay, what is the foundation upon which we have this current space. So then when I'm finally able to I'll go out, I'll talk to people. I like to build out scenes, so I like to find, okay, what is who's a person, where's a moment, where's this. So I have this foundation of research, and then how is that happening in a personal life? And then if I can find that moment and then go talk to that person, that's kind of how I work a little bit. Yeah, I also will try to. I also always talk about myself in my writing. I just feel like you got to be honest. And so that'll be yeah, it will be interesting. I'm actually, as the world opens back up, I'm trying to think about, okay, what does the summer look like for research? Where do I go? What do I do? And how do you do it in the safest, most possible way? But right now, I have great groups, online groups of mothers, and I have a good social media following, and so those are the ways I kind of have early conversations about things and listen. I also love to read widely. There's a lot of great writers out there who talk about these things, and I love to send them emails and say, what are you doing? Kind of like scientists, like, what's your research?
Yeah.
So that's what I do. I wish it was smarter or more interesting.
No, thank you for sharing some of that. I think for aspiring writers, that kind of discussion is really interesting and important for them. We're almost up on time with Liz Lenz today on COVID Calls. You just talked about social media, and this was the last thing I wanted to ask you about. You used this phrase recently in an article that you published about the phrase is the tyranny of tweets, which is another one of these things I read by you. I'm like, yep, that helps me understand things right now. I have huge mixed feelings about social media, as I imagine you do too. You talked about community building through social media, which I think is real. I think people do real research using social media communities. At the same time, it can be absolutely dispiriting and a mechanism to destroy democracy on any given day of the week.
And spread disinformation, which I'm sure any person working to vaccinate experiences every day. It's got to be a nightmare.
So, are you going to save Twitter? How can it be done?
I've been thinking about this recently, just because of something I wrote about Twitter disinformation in the age of Trump for a profile that I wrote for the Columbia Journalism Review. And I've been thinking about the ways that social media both liberates and and constrains. So yes, I mean, we do talk a lot about the disinformation, the harassment. I mean, I've gotten bomb threats before, and I get nasty emails and comments on the regular, but there's also the other side, in that it is freeing. A friend of mine, the writer Brandon Taylor, recently wrote about how as a young queer kid in a conservative state, like being on the internet allowed him to reimagine his whole life, his whole existence. I had a similar situation. I was able to see a whole way around, just like scholarly research and answers to questions that I might not have been able to find on my own before. And so I do think that, like, if you puncture a tire, like, the air goes out, but then it also goes flat, but then you get that was a terrible metaphor. delete it. But but I think there's something to that, like you can't have a space where you are fully allowed to reimagine the world
Right.
without the imagination running amok. And so how do you fix it? I'm not sure. I think you teach people to be more media literate. You try to break down those walls of words. I mean, many years ago, Milan Kundera wrote about, graphomania and people just like surrounding themselves in their walls of words. And it was great he did that before the internet, because that's exactly what some people do within the internet. But these are not new problems. They're just the same problems happening in different ways. And so I always try to keep that perspective, that it's an internet age, but it's also just an age, right? And so how do we conduct our way through it in the most ethical way possible that tries to make the world a better place for people? And it's exciting to me that the internet is still a place of community. It is still a place of connection. It has saved my life in this pandemic. Otherwise, as a single mom living alone, I wouldn't have anybody besides an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old to talk to, who are great. No, I mean, no criticism, but they're not adults.
Well, I'll keep following you on Twitter to see how you sort this out in real time. I want to thank my guest, Liz Lenz, and I want to make sure everybody knows that you can find her book, Godland, and you should also check out her most recent book, Belabored: A Vindication of the Rights of Pregnant Women. And just to thank you for your time today, Liz, and all of the great writing that you do. And I look forward to more.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing the work in this pandemic.
Stay healthy, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow at 5:30 p.m.